Hey, this is Now You Try, a podcast about self-sufficiency, sustainability, craftsmanship, and everything it takes to do it yourself.
So a little different approach to the Now You Try podcast this time. There's two reasons. One of them is practical and one of them is idealistic. The practical reason is I'm laid up with a cold, if you can't tell by the quality of my booming radio voice right now. So I'm laid up. I'm on the couch. The kids are in bed. Just turned on the microphone, decided to use what little voice I have left to get after it. And Luke is in California enjoying the magic of Disneyland with his family. So instead of digging through old recordings and trying to stitch something together, I figured we would do something that we have, and this ties into the idealist part, is that Luke and I always want to try to include what we recommend in terms of what we're reading or what we've heard about we should be reading or listening to, watching, people that we follow on social media and otherwise, just what we're into at that particular time. Because I think that's a cool thing about this medium, is that it gives the ability to be a jump-off point for not just discussion, but for new rabbit holes to go down, new things to follow, new places to take yourself intellectually, like maybe new people to find that can inspire you, motivate you, teach you something, because we've all got those people and we've all got our own little, our pet follows. Everybody's, there's a lot of big popular accounts everybody's following, but we've all got our own little, little side roads that we go down. So we wanted to take a chance to share those as well. So I figured I would do that in a little truncated version of the Now You Try podcast today. I'm going to break it into two sections today. What to read and what to follow. Basically what we're reading and what we're following. So I'll start off with the reading list, because I think anybody that's looking to grow as a person, that's looking to expand into all the realms that we always talk about, this sustainability, the self-sufficiency, being a better outdoorsman, being a better cook, being a better gardener, being a better person. You need to be reading. You need to be consuming as much as possible. And, if you can sit down and you can, put your face in the pages of a book, I think you're going to usually come out of it a better person, if not just a person with a better perspective, which usually leads to being a better person. So there you go. And look, I hold no judgment over anybody, and I do it too. Ebooks are a fantastic use of your time, especially when you got a lot of driving. I did this, I did a total of 26 hours of driving in the course of a week when I did this Colorado elk hunt. And you can be sure that I filled a lot of that with ebooks, a lot of that with podcasts, a lot of that with, things to be additive instead of just entertaining, things that I can maybe take something away from. So jumping into that, I do want to talk about a book that I'd read recently, and I'm going to do this kind of by our normal categories, the things we get into, starting with outdoorsmanship, hunting, and fishing. The book that I read is The Naturalist by Darren Lund. The Naturalist is a book about Teddy Roosevelt. Plenty of books about Teddy Roosevelt out there. But this one is interesting, and it really caught my eye because it looks at his entire life through the lens of him as a naturalist, not as a hunter, not as a president, not as an attorney, not even so much as his relationship with his family. That all plays into it. Of course, you can't tell his story without those things. But it really looks at it through the lens of him as a naturalist, and where Teddy Roosevelt got his start as a young man was as a collector. He was fascinated by nature and what he found, and it kind of walks you through that fascination early on and how he basically started his own museum in his room, and any of us that are enamored with nature can kind of relate to that. That's something that we all do. We're all kind of collectors. If you collect shed antlers, you collect bones, you collect feathers, you collect, insects, you collect plants. You can understand like that kind of obsession, that wanting to bring things back and study them and classify them. So that it starts with him there, and that it really was a lifelong passion for him, and it goes through all of his, adventures worldwide. His early visit to the African continent, and how being a naturalist shaped his experience there, and how it sort of shaped him as a man, as somebody who was a young, sickly, frail person, but his love for the outdoors drove him towards this this idea that he got from his father, this muscular Christianity, this idea that he had to be rugged, he had to be tough, and the outdoors and naturalism and in the end conservation and hunting were a big part of that for him. So loved that book. I really did like it. It helped put a lot of my things in perspective, the things that I'm thinking and wanting and seeing for my children and my family and my life. It helped to put those in perspective when you hear that a great person, a historical figure, had a lot of those same inklings, a lot of those same urges. I think it's going to make anybody who reads it feel just, a little bit more justified, maybe a little bit more sane or more insane. Hard to say. So another book I'm going to recommend, this isn't one like I'm currently reading, but it's one that I go back to constantly because I'm getting in the mode. Every time the holidays come around, I start thinking about what kind of booze I want to make. Most importantly, what kind of booze I want to have around, because what's the holiday without booze? I'm actually going to go the entire month of October without booze, so I'll be very happy to welcome it back when the holidays come around, November, December here. But I'm thinking about making a holiday cider again, and I've got some favorite recipes I can go back to for that. But when doing that, I always go back to, there's a book called How to Brew by John J. Palmer. It's more of a beer book, but it helps me to understand the technical side again. It helps to reacquaint me because I don't do this very often. I used to homebrew all the time. It used to be, one of the featured hobbies, but it's certainly fallen behind many of my dozens of other hobbies now. So, but when the holidays come around, I do consult this as a technical manual because it's not, of course it's about beer, but it's not just about, the hops, the grain and the water, the yeast. Like, it's not just that. It talks about your setup, the technical side, the approach, the sterilization, the action of yeast, the biology of the whole situation. Like, it's really good, and there's a million home brewing books out there. There are a million, and you can get lost in which one to read. But this was the one that I'm glad that I picked up first, and I picked up a lot of different manuals later, some that were very specific to certain ingredients even. But this was the one that it became, everybody has their Bible, and this became my Bible for homebrewing. So I definitely recommend that if you're stepping into homebrewing or something you're considering, or if you just want to make a batch of cider or a batch of beer one time, look into this book. It walks through all the different techniques from the easiest, to extract brewing to the toughest, which is all grain brewing and running your own setup for that. So but there's all stages in between that can help you do that. Definitely recommend it. And so that's our DIY selection. On the gardening side, there's a book that I actually got from my wife for her birthday that I have now kind of poached, and I'm reading myself. I'm holding it in my hand right now. It's Texas Fruit and Vegetable Gardening by Greg Grant. And obviously this is going to be pretty specific to Texas. But if you have any books in your state that are specific to your climate, the climate band that you're in, or the state that you're in, or the region that you're in, grab that, because for someone like me who is still really finding their way in gardening, this book is fantastic because it's big and color coded, and it lists things in a sensible way, and it just talks about, here are the things that grow in Texas that you can eat. That's it. The subtitle is Plant, Grow, and Eat the Best Edibles for Texas Gardens. That's exactly what I want out of a book. I don't care about perennials. I'm sorry. I don't really care about shrubbery beyond, what it does aesthetically or functionally for my garden or my backyard. Obviously, I've wrote an entire article on Yopon holly and making tea out of it, so I do care about that one. But that one pretty much takes care of itself. If you just look away for long enough in Texas, Yopon holly is going to grow. But growing fruits and vegetables in a Texas climate is tough, and other climates have their challenges too. It's the heat here. It's the heat and the combination of humidity and dryness, depending on the season that you get, that can be really tough. And we can still get hard freezes in the wintertime. So what a lovely place, right? But Texas fruit and vegetable gardening really, it makes it simple for me because I can just look through and say, what are the fruits that I can grow? When do I plant them? What are we going to need for my soil? How often do I need to water these things? How much sunlight, direct sunlight? How many hours a day is this particular leafy green going to need? All those things are in there, and it simplifies it for me. So that's one that I have kind of on the slide been reading behind my wife's back. But it was a present for her, so I still get credit, right? Now, to the cooking side, this is a little bit of an older book as well. And this is, I feel like, an odd choice because there's so many great cookbooks out there. But this one has been really, really helpful for me just because I love the structure of it. It's a book, You know the really hoity-toity store in the mall, or I guess they're not in malls anymore. Are there even malls anymore? But there's the kitchen store, Williams-Sonoma. So they make a ton of stuff, and a lot of pretty good quality stuff, to be perfectly honest. We own some Williams-Sonoma stuff in here. I know it was trendy, especially in the 2000s when we were building our home and life and everything, early 2000s. But, it's still good stuff. But they have these great cookbooks, and one of them is The Essentials of Baking. Williams-Sonoma Essentials of Baking. And I feel bad I didn't look up the authors. It has actual authors. It's not just written by the store, but that's how they market it. But what I loved about The Essentials of Baking, kind of the same thing that I've talked about with these other kind of how-to books. And I do read a lot of how-to books. I really need to read more fiction. I need to read more great fiction. I really intersperse it. The last good one I read was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I'm really glad I finally got around to. Another podcast for that. But I read a lot of these how-to books, so I've really started to kind of develop an eye for what works for me in them, and this one works really, really well. I love the structure in this Williams-Sonoma book. They do one on sauces as well that I have, and there might be one on meats. I can't recall, but I know I go back to the baking one, and I just picked it up recently because my 7-year-old, my daughter who's turning 7, my middle daughter, she requested homemade pizza for her birthday dinner. So that's one that I'm pretty regularly making, but I just like to pick things up and reacquaint myself with, okay, what's my technique for crust there? What are the, not just the technique, what are the principles that I'm getting into there? Technique, equipment wise, do I remember how to do this? I mean, it's probably been months since I've done it, so it's always good to just kind of pop it open to the page, and go for it. But what I love about the book is that it teaches you, before it just throws a bunch of recipes at you, it really breaks down like bread, for example, why bread is what it is. What is it about the mixture of those ingredients? What is it about the addition of yeast and fermentation to wheat that make it a more digestible food? And here's how that affects what you need to do in the kitchen and why you need to do it this way. It's kind of a dummy's guide. It's much classier looking than the dummy's guide or the idiot's guide kind of books. But it has a lot of that. But it teaches you, before it starts getting into all the recipes, it shows you the techniques you're going to need. It tells you how to pitch yeast. It tells you how to roll dough, how to get the proper window and all the stuff, and how much light should be shining through when you're making a certain kind of bread, or what the difference between flake pastry and puff and all this kind of stuff. The things that if you're not Luke, who is a bona fide chef and a chef instructor, he knows those things. You learn those in school, but this is a good kind of crash course. And then once you kind of get the handle on those, it's going to then break it down into okay, here's your dinner rolls, or here's your things that are your breads, and here's your crusts, and here's your desserts, and all that kind of stuff. So I do appreciate the structure of that one, and it's written intelligently. It's not written down, which sometimes I do need, for sure. I think the Texas Fruit and Vegetable Gardening is probably written down, and I think that's good. But the baking one, I appreciate that it feels like it's treating you as an equal, so I appreciate that part of it. So moving on to, with what little voice I have left here, I'm going to try to fire through these. Who to follow. This is one that Luke and I talk about all the time. Like, we're always kind of, bantering back and forth about who you following right now. Like, oh, have you seen this account? Have you seen this? My wife and I do it too. Like, it's, I think that's just the new that's the new gossip, because we have such a broader tribe and family network of people that we're talking about. And, you find out these cool accounts. So I'll go backwards order from what I did last time. So, starting with cooking, Jesse Griffiths. This is, if you can't tell, I'm in Texas, and this is going to be a very Texas-centric episode. But Jesse Griffiths is the founder and the executive chef of Daidue, which is a restaurant in Texas, which specializes in serving Texas-based regional cuisine. And they only use proteins, plants. All their ingredients are sourced from Texas and as close to Central Texas and Austin as they possibly can. They serve a lot of wild boar. They serve a lot of axis there. It's really awesome. Whatever proteins and whatever, any bird, any poultry they can get a hold of, any fish they can get a hold of, and they can source. They always choose wild game if they can, which I think is fantastic and so rare. And I don't know how they do it. Jesse is a genius to be able to run a restaurant that way. Small restaurant, so I'm sure that helps. I have eaten there, obviously, so big fan of the food. His execution is fantastic. So if you follow Jesse, it's cool because he's a hunter, he's a fisherman, he's just an all-around good guy. The Meat Eater guys, Meat Eater podcast recently made a round with him. They shot some fishing content with him and another guy I'm going to mention later. But they also did a podcast with him, and he's just such a fountain of knowledge. The guy is fantastic, and he's got, he's funny. He's definitely brilliant. So follow him, Jesse Griffiths. His Instagram is at Sacalait, SAC.A.LAIT. So that's a Cajun French word for. My family is from that region originally. My parents are, not me personally, but my parents were from Mississippi, Louisiana. Sacalait is like a Cajun French word for a crappie type of fish, and I don't know why it's called that, but that's basically like a bastardization of the French term for bag of milk. So sack of milk. So I don't know. Somebody out there write me and tell me why Cajuns call a crappie a Sacalait. So gardening. This isn't so much that you're going to get a ton out of following the account, but I want to send you down this path. Spence Farm, SPENCE Farm on Instagram. They don't post very often. What they do post is it's good content. But the reason Spence Farm is important is that I watched the documentary with the family, which was surprising that my kids sat through it, but it was called Sustainable. It came out in 2016. It's on Netflix now. And they followed this farm, Spence Farm, and it's part of the narrative about the idea of sustainable farming, and is it actually both sustainable and economically viable to farm sustainably. And it talks a lot about like how older practices or practices that are now out of vogue in the age of mega farming can actually be economically viable and can actually be done to scale and can give you the kind of yields comparable to what you're getting out of kind of what you want to call factory farming or, mega farms. So it's pretty interesting to see someone do a real case study and try to make a strong case and a narrative as well in the documentary about like, hey, we could return to this kind of farming. To where it's more family farm, it's more sustainable. You don't even have to get into the whole organic or not argument. The way they manage land and the way they, the way they fertilize, the way they rotate crops, like all these things that are sort of getting lost to time in the current farming environment because of this supposed need that we have to feed, billions of people, which we do. It's not a supposed need, but like I guess the better way to say that would be this kind of imposed idea that the practices that exist in farming are just for the purpose of scale, when in fact a lot of them are for the purpose of profit, because these are very, very large publicly traded corporations that are beholden to the shareholders that run a lot of these farms. So the priorities change, but so follow Spence Farm, check out that documentary. I think you'll find that very interesting to see that, hey, maybe there's a path out here, that doesn't involve burning the whole thing down and, me having to always go to the farmer's market to buy everything. Like maybe there's a path out in our lifetime that some of these sustainable practices can be brought in, because these people, Spence Farm is one of them, and other researchers are showing these methods can give you the same kind of yields. It's just that we might have to let go of as much of the profit narrative, the pure profit narrative. So pretty interesting stuff. So again, working back up that list. So the DIY, the skill side, this one is straight. This comes from my heart right here. I want you to follow the Squatober account. Squatober was started by Sorinex exercise equipment. Sorinex. So if you want to follow the account, it's at Sorinex, SORINEX_Squatober, which is SQUATOBER. So Squatober was an initiative come up with by Aaron Osmus, I believe, who's now the strength and conditioning coach at USC, but he worked for Sorinex for a long time. And it was his idea to say, hey, for the month of October, we're going to squat in some way, shape, or form every day. We're going to put weight on our back and we're going to squat. We're going to load up weight and we're going to squat. We're going to bend our knees. We're going to take our butt down to the floor and we're going to squat. And we're going to do work. In this idea that it's a great motivator and it's a great engine to kick off a general a generally healthier, stronger, more stable, and tougher base for a human being. And I could not agree more. Just having spent a week in the mountains, trudging up and down, Colorado high desert mountains, I was very, very thankful that I had done just enough squats in my life to survive that. And it does take strength, and it does take reserve strength, and it does take toughness to do that. And you get a lot of that toughness with a bar on your back. So I will say that I think it's worth investing your time. Even if you don't if you don't do Squattober, you should try to do some version of Squattober, because it's scalable for everybody. It's fun, and they put out workouts every day. There's lots of humor. There's lots of video. There's lots of participation, lots of support around it. But even if you don't, just follow it and just read it this month and see what it looks like. See what that kind of plan would look like if you put that into play in your life. And if you only did like 10 to 20% of that, you added that into your life, you'd probably end up being a stronger, healthier, better version of yourself. The squat is king, plain and simple. So I had to throw that in there for the DIY skill portion. The last couple of accounts that I'll say to follow on the hunting, fishing, outdoor side is, if you don't already, follow Donnie Vincent. Donnie Vincent is a hunter, kind of made his name as a bear hunter. And he has produced a film called The Other Side. And Donnie's a really interesting cat. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast. He's a hunter, but he's also very much a naturalist, and he's a writer. He writes prolifically for a lot of different publications, and he talks a lot more about I don't want to say the spiritual side, but I want to say like the psychological, the philosophical side of hunting. Not so much that it like beats you over the head, that he doesn't get to the meat of the stuff, that it's about the hunt. But he does take time to appreciate the whole picture of where he is. And the imagery on his Instagram is fantastic. I love the photography style. I love the way he presents what he's doing. I love the attention to detail, and I think that's I have not seen The Other Side yet. I have to point that out. I definitely am going to, but I think that's going to be reflected in his eye for making the film and how that's put out. So, or I guess how that's presented, I should say. So I'm looking forward to that. So Donnie Vincent is DONNIE _Vincent. And then another Texas guy I got to put it out there for is Alvin Detto. He's a Central Texas. He's from here in Austin. Again, I told you this is going to be Texas centric. He's a fly fisherman, and he's a fly fishing guide, and he's actually one of the he's a Yeti sponsored. What do they call that? Like sponsored person? And they're not sponsored athletes. I'm so used to working in that field that I call everybody an athlete. But yeah, like he's basically a brand representative for Yeti. But his primary job is that he is a fly fishing guide, and he actually operates on the Lower Colorado River quite often, along with going down to the coast. Which, if you don't know, in Austin, that's pretty neat, because the Lower Colorado is basically a city river. When it goes through Austin, it looks very much like a city river, but when you get just past the city limits, it actually gets pretty wild. It's a pretty cool place. So Alvin's a cool guy. He is a fantastic fisherman, and he does a lot for awareness of Texas waterways and stuff. So if you check him out, it's Alvin Detto. I'm just going to spell his last name, and if you spell the last name right, you'll find him. His last name is Dedeaux, Alvin Detto. All right, so you can tell the voice is going fast, so I'm going to do my best to wrap this up. But that's what we're into right now. So we'll probably do some more of these in the future. But don't be afraid to reach out to us. Go to nowyouTry.com, go to the contact form, reach out to us on Instagram at NowYouTryPodcast. Tell us what you're into. Who should we be following? What books should we be reading? What should we be listening to? Like, what new albums are coming out that are worth listening to? Anything like that. We do want to know about that stuff, because this is this is a whole picture that we're putting together. This is about, this isn't just about hunting and fishing. This isn't just about gardening or cooking or building stuff. This is about a life. This is building a life that you're both satisfied with and that you can sustain. So let's all get together. Let's share this. Let's hold up our phones to each other's faces and say, like, hey, follow this guy. And then, maybe we can put the phones down and actually talk about it for a while. Who knows? Thanks for listening to the Now You Try podcast. Check out content related to this episode and all other episodes, or contact us with questions at nowyouTry.com.